If you're like us, you love your Roth IRA because all your distributions are tax-free. But did you know that if you unknowingly violate the 5-year rule, you could pay taxes and penalties on distributions that otherwise should have been tax-free? Do you want to know what the 5-year rule is and how to use it to your advantage? Well, you better, because it'll mean the difference between paying taxes and getting tax-free distributions. If your investing and tax strategy for retirement includes tax-advantaged Roth accounts, you've probably heard about the IRS's 5-year rule. But if not, let me tell you about it. The simple version says that the Roth account needs to have been funded for 5 years before you can withdraw any earnings tax-free, even after you've reached the age of 59 and a half. Or you could owe taxes and a 10% penalty. Ouch. What may come as a surprise to you, though, is that there's actually several versions of the 5-year rule, some of which overlap, governing not just contribution start dates, but also rollovers and conversions. Here are the 5-year rules that you need to be aware of. The Roth IRA 5-year contribution rule, the Roth conversion 5-year rule, the 5-year rule for designated Roth accounts, and the Roth to Roth rollover 5-year rules. Falling afoul of any of them could trigger additional taxes and penalties. Paying unnecessary taxes or penalties defeats the whole point of having a Roth, as it's meant to be tax-free. So it's so important to understand how the various holding periods work. Let me quickly walk you through all the variations of the 5-year rule with easy to understand examples to make sure you're keeping your hard-earned distributions out of the hands of Uncle Sam. Let me tell you about the Roth IRA 5-year contribution rule. This is perhaps the most familiar holding period, and it determines whether earnings are taxed. As mentioned, if earnings are withdrawn before the 5-year contribution rule is met, taxes will apply to those earnings plus a 10% penalty if taken before age 59 and a half. Any money going into the account, so regular contributions, conversions, or rollovers, sets the clock ticking. But it's not measured from the date that the first dollar lands in the account. Instead, the holding period backdates all the way to January 1st of the year that the first contribution, conversion, or rollover goes in. Let me share with you an example. So let's say you made your first contribution on December 31st, 2021. That counts as a calendar year. So 2021, 2022, 2023, 24, and 25, and on January 1st, 2025, you meet the 5-year requirement. In reality, you only had your money in there for 3 years, but you meet the requirement because you understood the rules and you used them to your advantage. Another cool aspect of the 5-year rule is you're allowed to make contributions to a Roth IRA for the prior tax year all the way up until tax filing day, which means the start of your 5-year period would move all the way back to the previous January. Keep in mind that this applies only to contributions, not conversions or rollovers. And finally, the first contribution to any Roth IRA starts the clock ticking for all your Roth IRAs. So if you're interested in starting a Roth strategy, you should consider opening and funding a Roth IRA as soon as you can to get the clock ticking. Let's talk about the Roth conversion 5-year rule. This is a completely separate 5-year rule covering Roth IRA conversions. Each conversion has its own 5-year holding period, which starts on January 1st of the year in which the conversion occurs. Under this rule, if you withdraw converted funds before age 59 and a half, you'll generally have to pay a 10% penalty on any pre-tax dollars that were converted, not just the earnings, as well as income taxes on those earnings. It doesn't matter if you've already met the 5-year Roth contribution rule. But after age 59 and a half, you can withdraw converted funds without the 10% penalty. But remember, the 5-year contribution rule still applies. And if that 5-year rule hasn't been met, taxes may apply for the earnings portion on the withdrawal. So, how do you know whether you're taking a withdrawal of contributions, conversions, or earnings? For Roth IRAs, the IRS assumes you're taking out contributions first, followed by converted balances on a first in, first out basis, so oldest conversions first, and then earnings last. However, this can get complicated, especially if you have a mix of funds in your account, so be sure to work with a tax or a wealth management professional. Let me run you through an example. Ben, age 55, converts $10,000 of his pre-tax traditional IRA into a Roth IRA. 2 years later, he withdraws $6,000. However, because he hasn't met the 5-year rule and he's under the age of 59 and a half, the entire sum is subjected to the 10% early withdrawal penalty. Stu, age 58, decides to convert $7,000 of his pre-tax traditional IRA into a Roth IRA. It's his first Roth account, and at 61, the Roth account has grown to $11,000, and he decides to withdraw the entire thing thinking it's tax-free because he's older than 59 and a half. However, because he hasn't met the 5-year rule for Roth contributions, the earnings on the withdrawal will be taxable, but he won't be subjected to the 10% penalty since he's over 59 and a half. Now we're going to talk about the 5-year rule for designated Roth accounts like a Roth 401k. While these plans offer similar tax benefits to a Roth IRA, the holding periods work a little differently. Like with a Roth IRA, the 5-year holding period starts on January 1st for the year in which you make your first contribution. However, unlike with Roth IRAs, if you participate in multiple employer-sponsored plans that have designated Roth accounts, each plan will have its own 5-year holding period. More significantly, with the designated Roth, you don't have the option of tapping just contributions before the 5th year, thereby avoiding the 5-year rule for contributions, as you would with a Roth IRA. Instead, the IRS will assume that any withdrawal is a mix of both contributions and earnings, which could trigger taxes on the earnings portion and the 10% penalty if you're under 59 and a half. To determine how much of a distribution would be taxable, you'd use the pro rata rules to calculate the ratio of contributions versus earnings in the account, and then multiply your distribution by that ratio to determine the taxable portion of the distribution. Let's use Fred in this example. When Fred was age 58, he contributed $20,000 to a Roth 401k. And at 61, Fred's now retired and the Roth account is worth $23,000. So he decides to withdraw $10,000. And since the account hasn't met the 5-year contribution holding period, the pro rata rule applies, meaning the distribution will be considered part contribution and part earnings. Because Fred's over 59 and a half, there's no 10% penalty on the distribution. However, the earnings portion of the withdrawal will be subject to taxes. Finally, let's discuss Roth to Roth rollovers and the 5-year rule. Believe it or not, rolling Roth assets from one account to another Roth account involves still more applications of the 5-year rule. Here's the basics. As I mentioned earlier, the first contribution to any Roth IRA starts the 5-year clock ticking for all Roth IRAs. So if the 5-year contribution rule has been met for one Roth IRA, it applies to all the others and you're good to go. So what if you roll your Roth 401k to a Roth IRA? The holding period for the Roth IRA account determines whether the 5-year contribution rule has been met. The holding period of the Roth 401k doesn't matter. So if you rolled assets from a Roth 401k that had met the 5-year contribution rule into a Roth IRA that did not meet the 5-year rule, the Roth IRA's holding period would still apply to the assets that were rolled over. Now, what if you go Roth 401k to Roth 401k? Generally, the 5-year holding period is based on whichever account is older. For example, if you transferred all the assets from a 10-year-old Roth 401k from your last employer to a new Roth 401k with your current employer, the older Roth would determine the holding period for all the assets held in the new Roth. Not all employer plans allow for in-plan rollovers, so make sure to contact the plan sponsor to find out if that's available for you. Bottom line, if tax-free distributions are an attractive idea to you, and they are to us, then consider adding a Roth IRA as part of your wealth management plan. The sooner you open and fund a Roth IRA, the sooner you have the 5-year Roth contribution clock ticking. Again, get in touch with us if you have any questions or if you need help implementing these strategies. As you can see, It's simple, but not easy. There's a lot of complexity to this. So here are your key takeaways on the 5-year rule. Number 1, the 5-year clock starts when you first contribute money to your Roth IRA. Number 2, the 5-year rule applies to earnings and not contributions. And if you meet the 5-year rule and you're at least 59.5, you may make a qualified distribution of earnings that's exempt from taxes and penalties. We help clients every day use the 5-year rule to help them live the retirement of their dreams and never have to worry about going back to work. If you'd like to talk to us about doing the same thing, use the link to book a free consultation. Make sure to like and subscribe the channel, share with anyone who you think can benefit, and we'll see you on the next one.